Um, yeah, it's working. So please forgive me if I have to read more than once. I'm not a native. So let's go then. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the fourth edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Mauricio Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I'm a former Reuters Brazil correspondent and also used to work for UOL, Brazil's biggest online news web. I'm a former Reuters Brazil correspondent and also used to work for... Yeah, I'm hearing some noise as well.
No, don't worry. Take it from the top. Take it from the top again. There was a little bit of interference when you said "Oi, pessoal." So just take it from the top again if you can. Thanks.
I'll just use one thing that I think can be very useful from the start, and then I'll open your mics again pretty soon. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. I can't hear you, but well, let me know if there's anything wrong. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the fourth edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Mauricio Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I'm a former Reuters Brazil correspondent and also used to work for UOL, Brazil's biggest online news site. I also run a blog called The Brazilian Operating in This Area. The Brazil podcast brings together foreign and domestic journalists for a weekly discussion, covering all the biggest news from Brazil. Let me just reopen the mics again. Was that all right, Sam?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Fantastic.
I can still make a happy voice despite Corinthians yesterday, but that's fine. I'm depressed. I'm really depressed.
You and 30 million other people.
I'm really depressed. I'm actually doing my best. So, Sheena, your last name Rossiter, right? Or
yeah, it's pronounced Rossiter. Yeah.
Okay. This week's guests are Sheena Rossiter, co-owner of Dona Ana Films and Multimedia. Dona Ana Films and Multimedia. This week's guests are Sheena Rossiter, co-owner of Dona Ana Films and Multimedia, and the Rio de Janeiro correspondent for Monocle. Hi, Sheena.
Hi, Mauricio.
Did I say it all right?
Oh yeah, that was perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Rachel Glickhouse, a Brazil. Rachel Glick. Just wait for the noise. Okay. Rachel Glickhouse, a Brazil writer and author of Rio Gringa. Should I say riogringa.com?
Yeah, if you want.
Okay. Rachel Glickhouse, a Brazil writer and author of riogringa.com, based in New York. Hello, Rachel.
Oi, Mauricio.
That sounded very Brazilian. Our producer is Sam Cowie, a journalist based in Rio.
Hi, Mauricio.
Welcome, guys, to the fourth edition of the Brazil podcast. Our intro tune this week is Sangue de Bairro by Chico Science and Nação Zumbi from the soundtrack of Baile Perfumado. That sounded terrible. I need to go again. Our intro tune this week is Sangue de Bairro by Chico Science and Nação Zumbi. I'll just stop there. Is it popular abroad?
I don't know, man. Go ahead. That's fine. That's great to me.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Our intro tune this week is Sangue de Bairro by Chico Science and Nação Zumbi. So let's kick off then. So for this week's first topic, we're going to talk about the protests and strikes that took place around the country last week. There is at least 7,000 people who took part of the anti-World Cup protests all over Brazil. There are other protests which took even more people to the streets by organized movements, such as teachers, people that work in the judiciary system, homeless people as well. Some of them were actually quite close to World Cup infrastructure, such as the Arena Corinthians in São Paulo. Others were in main roads like the Paulista Avenue, also in São Paulo. So I'll start with Sheena. How were these protests portrayed in the international media?
Hi, Mauricio. Yes, in the international media, they were portrayed as they were quite violent, especially in cities like Sao Paulo, where images of basically protesters setting fire to tires in the middle of the streets and breaking down glass windows in banks were blasted all over the news. In Rio, though, they still were kind of portrayed as a bit more violent, but that was all but the contrary when you were actually really there. I was at the latest protest this past Thursday, and the worst thing that I did see was basically a group of Black Bloc protesters setting fire to the World Cup sticker book. That was basically as spicy as it got this week in the Rio protests. But here in Rio, they were quite tame. Sao Paulo, it seemed to be, there's a bit more tear gas and violence there being portrayed. But definitely on the Huffington Post, there was a whole photo series basically portraying, don't go to Brazil during the World Cup because this is what's going on. But in that sense, I would say that some of the photos, especially from the Rio protests, did kind of lie a bit because it was quite tame in reality.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, what was your perception about the reaction to the protest last week?
Well, after last year's protests and the really explosive impact it had in the international media, I think a lot of the subsequent protests this year have just not had the same impact. But at the same time, a lot of the articles I'm seeing about the World Cup protests are basing a lot of their information on what happened in June and what's not on what's actually happening now. So so you'll see a lot of things that are talking about like Media Ninja and everything that happened in June, but they're not really looking as much at what's happening now. And obviously you have media outlets like AP and Reuters that are reporting what's actually happening, but then you have some other outlets that are kind of looking more to the past than to current times.
I would agree with that. That a lot of it's focusing on what happened about a year ago, and the truth of the matter is that even though the protests continue to go on, the momentum certainly has been lost, I would say, over the past year or so. And since there isn't really a leader behind a lot of these protests, there's no real focus at the center of them, which also causes a problem in maintaining its momentum.
Yeah, it makes sense here in São Paulo as well. I know that Rio and São Paulo have been different protest-wise in the last year or so, but I was in Paulista Avenue on the day of the protest, and I could see more people in organized movements before the protest, actually, going for the teachers' protest, or some people just, who are related to unions that are very anti-Dilma at the moment as well. They were trying to gather some support in Paulista Avenue, and when it was about time, the anti-World Cup protesters went to Paulista Avenue. It was pretty peaceful. They were there for 2 hours. It was pretty okay. But then when for those who don't know São Paulo and that part of the city, there's the main road, which is Paulista Avenue, and then there is Consolação Street, which stretches all the way to the old part of the city, and you could see about 200 people who were very excited about actually a car resale store, and they wanted to trash the whole place, and that's what they did. But it was very different from the people who were in Paulista Avenue. These people were just gone after the first windows broke, actually. But of course, it makes good pictures. We'd all take those pictures if we were there, wouldn't we?
Definitely, and actually that's the same kind of, I can echo those sentiments here at the Rio de Janeiro protest. For the most part, it was very peaceful, and as I mentioned about those group of Black Blocs who were burning one sticker book, it was a really incredible scene, and I actually managed to take a picture of this from the flip side of things, if you will. It was basically just piles of photographers and video journalists just kind of piled on top of one another. And I was standing behind the protester, and basically the picture, you could see just all these photographers taking a picture of this one teenager burning a World Cup sticker book, and the ratio was literally 30 photographers to 1 protester. So that kind of gives you the indication. And the thing is, those were the images that were shown in the Huffington Post of how disastrous and how over the top these protests are, and how you shouldn't be going to the World Cup because they're so violent. And as you said, Mauricio, the ratio of the peaceful protesters versus the, so to speak, hellraisers is definitely it's not equal.
Yeah, and did you guys get to see the sabotage on the stickers themselves?
Oh, how they disguise them as bloc protesters by drawing on their face with a Shockley marker? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
I did like that a lot. I thought that was quite creative.
So did I. I wish I had some of those. I wish I had some of those. But
Mauricio,
yeah.
Can I just add in that, and I know you follow this very carefully, but my impression is that in the international media, there's this expectation that the World Cup is going to revive the protests just as they happened last year with big numbers, just by nature of the fact that it's happening and some people oppose it. But I don't know that there's necessarily a recognition that last year's protests were not necessarily due to the World Cup. They were due to a lot of other things. So I think there's a lot of confusion about what is actually bringing people out to the streets, and what would inspire something on the scale of last year.
Can I just chip in there? Yeah, I think there's a real tendency in certain aspects of the international media to group any protest or any action, really, which is happening in Brazil at the moment, with the popular protests which happened last year. And for people that are on the ground here, I think we all know that's really not the case. You know, whether it's a strike, whether it's a protest about someone who's been killed by the police or something like that, there's a real tendency to group that with the same popular protests of last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Rio, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but Rio raised the transport fare prices just yesterday, just a few hours ago, and there were no protests against that. So it shows a bit that the reason why the protests kicked off last year. I mean, they could have kicked off again. They could have started again just because of the transport fares, and it just wasn't the case. But Rio and São Paulo are totally different from other parts of Brazil, and I suppose the situation in Recife got much uglier last week because of the policemen's strike. Who should I go with this, Sam?
Yeah, sure. Please
should I just give the cue to your friend?
I don't know. It's not happening, man. He's not getting back till 10, and I couldn't get his. Yeah, so I think we're just gonna have to leave that one. We'll get him on another show when we need some info about Recife.
But would you like to make some comments on that as well?
Well, I wasn't there. I've only read what everyone else has read in the international media. So,
fair enough.
Please, go ahead.
Most of us are either in Rio and São Paulo. If you want to comment, that's fine.
Absolutely. I haven't got anything particularly constructive to comment about it. No, if anyone else does, please do.
I don't really have anything to comment, but I would say that I just saw that a number of different types of police, federal, highway, and civil, are planning on doing a big strike on Wednesday across something like 12 states. And there had been rumors of this happening last week, that there was a big nationwide police protest plan, but it looks like it's going to happen in at least a portion of states. So Recife was sort of, or rather Pernambuco was sort of a foreshadowing of what might happen on Wednesday.
Of course, and that's going to arise in a very interesting discussion if Brazil actually is interested in that discussion, which is the demilitarization of the police. One of the reasons why there is actually a military mindset in the police is that they cannot go on strike, and well, if they keep going on strike, the reason is not there anymore, is it? So they will have to come up with another excuse. Should we move on to the second topic then?
I think we should. We've got some really excellent stuff there. That went really, really well. It's going to be really easy for me to edit. So thanks, guys.
Good, and I think it's going to be even easier now because Rachel is all over this second topic. Then,
fantastic,
I mean,
fantastic.
With the due distance, not to smell terrible.
Yeah, yeah. Rachel, please take control on this one, and then I'm sure Sheena and I can chip in something about, like, the fact that we can't swim in Flamengo Beach, and there's so many places in Rio that, like, you can't swim. Botafogo. Sheena, you live in Botafogo, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's go ahead with the second topic.
Let's go. Well, our second story for this week regards Rio Guanabara Bay. Monday's front page of the New York Times featured a story about Rio Guanabara Bay, how polluted it is, and how polluted it is, and how polluted it is.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Mauricio. If you need to start again, please take it from the top. Just
I will.
Sounds. Cheers, man.
No problemo. Let me just turn off the phone. Our second story this week regards Rio Guanabara Bay. Monday's front page of the New York Times featured a story about Rio's Guanabara Bay, how polluted it is, and the concerns that several sailors can have for the Olympic Games. Rachel, you reported on this story a while. Rachel, you reported on this story. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So I actually reported on this story last week before the Times. And I've been researching this for months because it's not something that's a secret, and it's something that everybody in Rio knows is a problem because they encounter it sometimes every day, depending on where you live. I also used to live in Botafogo, so I would smell it every day that I lived there. And for people who live in favelas, they see it every day and smell it. So it's something that is not a secret, and it affects all Cariocas regardless of social class in one way or another. And a lot of the media coverage has been pegged to the Olympics, naturally because of the water sports and how difficult it's going to be to maneuver the bay for sailors. But what I wanted to do was look at why this is a problem for people who live in Rio and why it's a problem for people who just go to the beach, which includes tourists. And a lot of what I found is that the sewage problem essentially stems to a very simple issue, that it's not getting treated. So when you have a large amount of sewage that's not getting treated, it's not connected to pipes, it's going straight into rivers and canal systems that eventually are emptied onto beaches, then naturally you have a contamination problem. The interesting thing is that this has already had some reverberations, and there's a lot of pressure at the local level to try to address this from a public policy perspective. And with the elections coming up in October, it's possible this issue could become a more visible issue, because something that a lot of sewage or sanitation advocates say is that it's an invisible problem because it's basically pipes underground, and no politician wants to cut a ribbon on something that you can't see.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And would you say that's how risky is it for the Olympics? I don't mean, I'm thinking they're not going to use that part of the city as it is now, but for the time they have until the opening ceremony, do you reckon this is going to be a hard task to achieve? I mean, to have that at least at an acceptable level?
Well, you have two things that are a problem for sailors and for those who need to use the bay for sports. You have sewage, which is something that in theory could be fixed if they installed more sewage plants and had them operate. One of the problems they have is the biggest sewage treatment plant is operating at 50% capacity, and they have one new sewage plant that hasn't opened yet. So they need to actually get more plants, and they need to get them operating, and that could address the sewage problem. Presumably in 2 years. I think that's doable in 2 years if you actually get things going. But the other problem is trash. So somewhere between 80 and 100 tons of trash enter Guanabara Bay every single day. So part of the plan the government has is to do these eco boats that take the trash out, and they also have these things called eco barriers that are supposed to reduce the flow of trash into the bay. But they're very band-aid solutions, and they're not going to deal with the trash in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Sheena and Sam, can you smell that from your houses as well?
Unfortunately not. No, fortunately not, Maurizio. No.
I'm close, but I'm not that close. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I remember in London there was an issue with the Hyde Park waters as well. I remember the aquatic marathon people, they had issues there as well. But what the organizers there said is that it was at least to an acceptable level of 80% of clean waters, and even if it's not 100%, it has to be at least to that level. But I suppose, Rachel, how much is Rio's? Is it like 20, 30?
How much is treated?
Yeah.
It's somewhere around 40%.
So that's a long way.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
Yeah, but it's a long way to an acceptable level.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be a very interesting year for the IOC to do the checks and see if they can keep the competitions in Rio, because if they can't, that's probably one of the easiest sports to change venues. But it would be a massive blow to Rio, because one of the triumphs of the whole bid was to say that most sports could actually be played in Rio. The competition could be in Rio, and just taking one would be a massive blow for them, I suppose.
Well, there have been some suggestions as well as that there's potentially going to move the venue from Guanabara Bay all the way out to Búzios, the other coastal town in Rio de Janeiro state. But of course, the problem with that, then you're having the potential for more logistic problems, which is already going to be an issue during the Rio 2016 Olympics, because as a Rio resident myself, it's not exactly easy to get around within the city, namely out to Jacarepaguá and Barra da Tijuca, which is where a lot of the venues are going to be. So even getting from Guanabara Bay to other venues would have been a stretch. So that if you have to travel all the way to Búzios, it would be a pretty isolated event. But that is a potential that they're offering. Of course, that could also enter into another problem, that it's a different municipality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have done that in China. They've done that in Tsingtao, which is about 300 kilometers away. But I would say the main point is that one of the good points about the Rio bid was that most sports could actually be kept in the same city, and if they have to drive any sports out, that's going to show that the bid wasn't as serious. Well, we kind of know that, but it's going to show the IOC that the projects were not as serious as they showed it to the elderly members of the Olympic family.
Well, and also what's serious about this as well, Mauricio, is that sailing will be the first test event that's going to be happening in August, and that's not that far away.
Yeah, and well, if I may add one last thing about this topic, one of the poster boys for Brazilian Olympic sport all over the world is very likely Torben Grael, who's a very popular sailor, and he does advertisement for Dolce & Gabbana and for loads of these luxury brands. And I'm wondering if he's not going to be an even bigger communication issue for Rio as well, for Rio 2016, because he's a guy. Torben is he's very appreciated in international media, and if he doesn't have nice things to say about the sport he loves and the city which is going to host the Olympics in his home nation, that could trigger more criticism, of course. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm actually thinking of reading this exactly how you wrote it, Sam.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it, man.
And in the end, say just feel free to rant about how dreadful it is.
Yeah. Please do. I must say this week's gone remarkably smoothly so far, Mauricio. What do you reckon?
Good. It's because of the guests.
Exactly.
Oh, stop.
Let's go then. So, finally for the evening, we're going to discuss. Olala. I think it's.
I don't know. What's the name of it? I don't even.
We are one.
Ole, ola.
Oh, that's it.
I think it's We Are One.
But it's like we are one, ole ole ola or something like that. No?
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hang on, I'm gonna get the. I'm pretty sure it's ole ole ola, we are one.
Ole ola, we are one. Is
that... Are you Googling?
I'm trying to, but my cover just froze. It's just dreadful, isn't it?
It's
yeah, my
horrendous,
computer's
man.
painfully slow.
We are one. Pitbull.
Hang on.
We are one ole ola.
I'm getting iPad assistance. We are one ole ola?
Yes.
What is it? It's ole ola. We are one ole ola.
Yes, that's it. So let me go again. Finally, for the evening, we're going to discuss We Are One Ole Ola, which has been chosen as the 5th official anthem for the World Cup. And feel free to rant about how dreadful it is, please.
I quite like it, actually.
Well,
I'm joking. It's terrible.
Well, I think this song is basically just marketing at its best, and I can exactly imagine how it was produced and compiled. You know, just a group of white men in suits sitting around a boardroom table thinking about how they can market this World Cup. And of course, they had to get Pitbull and J-Lo on this because they needed some famous artists to market it because Claudia Lecce is... Huh?
How much you reckon they paid for those guys? I mean, last time I checked, Pitbull and Jennifer Lopez weren't doing too good in the music scene.
Well, I can't imagine how much they paid them. They definitely probably paid Jennifer Lopez a pretty penny, from what I can imagine, because I think it was a few months ago they initially launched this kind of as a promotion to journalists at a Maracanã press conference when FIFA had a local organizing committee press conference for us here. And they actually brought Claudia Lecce and Pitbull to promote it, but of course Jennifer Lopez couldn't show up. She was unable to make it.
Rachel,
so I think she wasn't well enough.
Right.
Well, the thing I have to say about it is it's not a new thing for international artists, obviously, to be the headliners for a World Cup anthem. We saw that in South Africa, and we see that before. Ricky Martin is always singing something. But I think what really strikes a nerve with this one is that Brazil is a country that's so well known for its music and for the uniqueness of its music, and there was such a great opportunity to produce something very Brazilian sounding, something that actually came from Brazil, and something that really did highlight a Brazilian artist. I know they have Claudia Lecce, but clearly they tried to highlight 2 international artists, and they just didn't do that. It's sort of this, as Sheena was saying, this very corporate, watered down thing.
Do you think they made it that bad on purpose, just out of spite, or?
No.
No?
I do.
As Rachel said, there's so many good Brazilian artists. They could have picked numerous other artists. Even Claudia Lecce, she's not very well known even within Brazil for some Brazilians, So
is she an artist?
She is. Well, exactly.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware.
But I think that's kind of the point, is that they could have picked, as Rachel was saying, they could have used this as an opportunity to find a talented, high-profile Brazilian who could have just as successfully marketed this had they played their cards right.
Sorry to interrupt here. Could somebody just give a brief description of the track and the video, just for the people out there that haven't actually seen the track and the video?
I'm actually watching the video right now on mute.
That's the best way to watch it.
Sorry, I'm tuning it up a bit now. Okay, sit back down. No, but the video is basically clearly shot on a studio set, not in Brazil at all, with just kind of a parachute of flags stitched together, hanging over the artists, who are surrounded by a gaggle of samba dancers, capoeira dancers, and Brazilian samba drummers, and scantily clad dressed ladies.
And 14 seconds of Claudia Lecce singing in Brazilian Portuguese.
Exactly.
Well, that's about right for her in a way, but.
And there's a few kisses on the World Cup. A few boys wearing nothing but shorts kissing the World Cup.
How nice is that?
Who's this Pitbull guy? Does anyone know who this guy is?
He's a Cuban artist. This is a Cuban-American artist who does pretty much the same kind of music that he did to We Are One. I mean, all his songs, in a way, are We Are One, but in different fashion.
Yeah, I mean, he always sounds like he smoked a pack of cigarettes before he starts rapping.
Does he like football? Does anyone know what team he supports? Anything like this?
No, he's a Cuban American, so soccer is probably not his thing. It's baseball, so that makes it all the more incongruous, really.
And what about J-Lo? Does she have a team, or?
Probably not.
You reckon she's a Corinthiano, Mauricio?
Oh, very likely. Oh, very likely.
Or more likely Sao Paulo. More likely Sao Paulo. What do you reckon?
I think she's more of a Corinthians fan because she's very passionate, and you can see that in the video.
Oh, you remember she's Jenny from the Block as well, right? So, you know.
Exactly.
She fits the Corinthian, you know.
Very much. And well, about these World Cup songs, one thing that I find interesting, my last experience with sporting events was in London 2012, and they had this dreadful song by Muse, which was Survive or something. It was just dreadful. It was just terrible. So what people actually did, I mean, no one was listening to Muse on the streets. They were listening to Queen, because that's probably the happiest British band there is, if there's any other. But when the Olympics went on, people were just listening to Queen. No one was listening to Muse. And I suppose at some point in Brazil they're going to find some other song like MC Guimê's País do Futebol or some other that can actually be more related to Brazil, and people can actually sing it with some kind of pride. The World Cup atmosphere is surely not 100% in Brazil, but when it catches on, I suppose they're going to choose another song and just forget We Are One, which is, I mean, Oblivion is probably the best place for We Are One.
But what song do you think should take its place then, Mauricio?
I'm very biased on this because I've mentioned this in the other shows. There's a song called just a second. Não, tô falando aqui. Tá? Desculpa. Sorry, mom was here and that's life. So one song I think definitely fits the spirit of Brazilian football. It's called Que Bonito É. To me, it's the Chariots of Fire of Brazilian football. It should be played in every game. But it's a song from the 50s. Brazilians used to listen to that song a lot when they went to the movie theaters and they watched something called Canal 100, it was basically football clips of 1 or 2 minutes that were put on the screen 2 minutes before the movies actually started, and that song really it reminds football to. It smells football. It sounds like football to every Brazilian. And if there's one song to choose, I would go with Que Bonito É. People are listening a lot to MC Guimê. This song called País do Futebol, the land of football, or the country of football, because of Neymar as well. Neymar features in their video as well. So that could be a good choice. Do you have any other suggestions?
I don't, but I wanted to hear what you did.
Anyone else?
Well, if you're saying that Neymar featured in the video, then couldn't you argue that Eu Quero Chu, Eu Quero Cha would be a potential song?
And that's better than Cláudia Leite, I suppose.
Well, at least the footballers themselves got into that one.
Yeah. In 2002, there was a kind of a World Cup anthem for the national team itself, which is the Deixa a Vida Me Levar by Zeca Pagodinho, and it somehow talked about how Brazilians live their life to the fullest without worrying too much and just going with the flow. And I suppose it could come back. It could come back since the atmosphere is not totally set in. There is time to change, and there is time to give We Are One the oblivion it actually deserves. One thing I have to say about We Are One, and that's probably the only good thing I have to say about it, is that this ole ola thing, although it's just dreadful, it can work in a stadium. So at some point in a match, if your team is losing or winning 4-0, it could actually work. But just because of the ole ola, which is not something that is very crafty to do, is it?
I'm sure people who are in the stadium are going to get excited in a certain way, no matter what. But I think that is a very good point. That definitely has. It's very catchy, and you could chant that in a stadium. But I think people will kind of create their own little anthems, if you will. Especially Brazilians, they're really good at doing that.
Let's hope for that. Guys, should we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. If anyone's got anything else to say, that's been great so far.
Yep. So I'll wrap up. So that's it for this week. Thanks to our. Just a second, because there's some background noise.
No worries.
And I'll just do the machine thing again. Okay. Out. So that's it. That's it for this week. Thanks to all our guests. You've been listening to the Brazil podcast. This week I leave you with Canto. Is it Canto? Sorry. You've been listening to the Brazil podcast. This week I leave you with Canto das Três Raças by Clara Nunes. Just open again. Sam, was that all right?
Perfect, man. Let's wrap up. That's been great. Thanks, guys.
That's really, really good. Is there anything you'd like to add, just for us to finish the transmission?
No, this has been great. I love nerding out. Whenever you want to nerd out about Brazil, you let me know.
That's really great. Let me just end the transmission, and